Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. This is unacceptable. Unbelievable. Incompetence squared. Alexander's voice echoed through the conference room like a storm. 15 scientists. 15, and not one of them can solve a basic stability equation for Harrison Innovations AI. He slammed the tablet onto the glass table with such force that some of the scientists flinched. The atmosphere at Harrison Innovations was stifling. The scientists, visibly exhausted, stood around a whiteboard covered in a web of complex calculations, frantic scribbles, and confusing arrows. The math problem in front of them was the key to unlocking the final module of a revolutionary AI. A billion-dollar project that had been the company's main focus for nearly a year. You have 24 hours. If no one gives me a concrete solution by then, you're all fired. One of the scientists cleaned his glasses. Another scratched the back of his neck, unable to meet the CEO's eyes. Maybe if we step out for a bit, we'll clear our heads. Go before I completely lose my patience. The group left. Heads down. Some mumbled guesses. Others just carried frustration on their faces. Soon after, Alexander also left, clearly irritated. A few minutes later, Emily Thompson, the new secretary, entered the room. She started picking up used cups, loose papers, pizza crusts, and crumpled napkins. The place was a mess. Emily frowned at the state of the room, a true reflection of the tension hanging in the air. As she looked at the board, she suddenly froze. What is this? The numerical chaos before her looked like a battlefield. Codes, variables, and tangled functions. But there was something, a detail out of place, a missing link. Emily narrowed her eyes. This is what's blocking the elite geniuses, she murmured, almost talking to the marker now spinning between her fingers. Doubt became instinct, and instinct turned into action. With steady hands and sharp eyes, she began making small changes. She fixed an index, repositioned a variable, a precise adjustment that realigned the heart of the equation. 2 minutes. 3 at most. Emily stepped back and stared. Done. Solved, she said softly, almost not believing it. And then Alexander walked in. His eyes, usually sharp, now looked even more irritated. He walked halfway into the room and stopped when he saw the board. Something was different. He squinted. Who touched the calculations? Emily froze. She was still holding the marker cap. I did. Alexander turned to her like he just heard something absurd. You? Yes? He blinked, stunned, took 3 steps forward, eyes locked on the new shape of the equation. The room was so silent you could hear his breathing grow heavier. You touched this thinking it would solve the problem. Not thinking. I solved it, she replied firmly. Alexander didn't say a word. He pulled the tablet from his jacket, opened the AI model, and started entering the data. Lines of code began to respond. He compared it to the previous version, ran a simulation. His eyes widened, though he tried to keep a straight face. This, he muttered, this is working. Emily leaned against the counter, arms crossed. But if you prefer, you can erase it. Just a secretary's scribble. Alexander looked up. His eyes were locked on her now. There was no more skepticism. There was something worse. Uncertainty. You're coming with me tomorrow to the lab. 8 sharp. I want you to explain exactly how you did this, word by word. Without waiting for reply, he turned and left the room with the same intensity he had entered. Emily looked at the board again, then at the door, and let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. I think I just hacked the brain of Mr. Ice Boss. The next morning, Emily arrived at the lab at 8 sharp, carrying her brown leather folder and a coffee that looked bigger than her head. The place was completely different from the meeting room where she usually worked. Here, everything breathed technology. Giant monitors on the walls, equipment she couldn't even name, and a silence that cut like a blade. Alexander stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the full team of scientists, 15 brilliant minds who just 24 hours earlier couldn't solve a problem she had cracked in 3 minutes. You're right on time, said Alexander without a smile. Emily, I want you to explain to the entire team how you solved the equation yesterday. Emily looked around. Every face in the room was turned toward her, showing a mix of curiosity, doubt, and maybe even a little embarrassment. She took a sip of her coffee and sighed. Good morning to you all, she said with a dry smile. What a warm room. I can feel the love in the air. Dr. Harrison, the technical director, cleared his throat. Miss Thompson, Mr. Alexander told us you made some changes to the equation. We'd like to understand your thought process. Emily set her folder down on a nearby table and turned toward the whiteboard, which was still just the way she had left it. My process. She chuckled softly. You really want to know? We do, Alexander said, arms crossed. All right. Emily pointed to the board. You were trying to force open a locked door when the key was already in the lock. One of the younger scientists, Michael, frowned. What do you mean? Look, Emily grabbed a marker and circled a specific part of the equation. You were so focused on making things complicated that you forgot the basics. This variable was in the wrong place. All it needed was to be moved. Just moved? Doctor, Harrison looked doubtful. That doesn't make sense. We've run that setup dozens of times. Yeah. Emily shrugged. But you ran it wrong. The room went silent. Alexander stepped forward. Explain more. Emily sighed and put her hands on her hips. Imagine trying to open a can of food with a hammer. Technically, it might work, but there's a thing called a can opener. You were hammering away when you could have just opened it. Laura, one of the senior scientists, crossed her arms. That's a very simplified way of explaining a complex issue. Sometimes the simplest answers are the ones that work, Emily replied, taking another sip of coffee. But if you'd rather keep hammering, I'll go back to my desk and let you all play with your numbers. Alexander watched her closely, her every move, her every word. Something about her annoyed him and fascinated him at the same time. Dr. Harrison, he said, eyes still on Emily. Check her math again. The technical director sighed, went to the computer, entered the data, ran the simulations, checked them 3 times. When he turned back, his face looked different. The math is correct. Not just correct, it's elegant. Emily smiled and gave a small bow. Thank you, doctor. I'll be adding that to my resume. Elegant with equations. Alexander felt a mix of irritation and curiosity growing in his chest. How could a secretary solve in minutes what a whole team of geniuses couldn't crack in weeks? All right, he said, voice calm. You'll join the project. I'll what? Emily almost choked on her coffee. Temporarily as an observation assistant. The room filled with whispers. Emily looked around, realizing she wasn't the only one surprised. Observation assistant, she repeated. So, I sit here and watch you work. It means you'll attend meetings and give input when needed. Alexander answered, the company needs to understand how your mind works. Emily laughed. My mind works like anyone else's. You guys are just overcomplicating things. Dr. Harrison stepped forward. Miss Thompson, do you have a background in math, engineering, computer science? I have a high school diploma and 2 years of business school, she replied. Without a hint of shame, I dropped out to work. The silence returned. Emily felt everyone, staring at her like she was some rare creature. Look, she said, placing her coffee on the table. I'll join the project, but I have a few conditions. Alexander raised an eyebrow. Conditions? First, I keep wearing my usual clothes. I'm not pretending to be a scientist in a lab coat. Second, I stick to my regular hours as a secretary. This project is extra. Third, if anyone here treats me like I'm dumb just because I don't have a PhD, I'll walk right back to my desk and leave you with your elegant equations. The room fell completely silent. Emily crossed her arms and waited. Alexander studied her face for a few seconds. There was determination there and a confidence he hadn't expected. I accept your terms, he finally said. Doctor, Harrison looked like he was about to protest, but Alexander stopped him with just a look. Starting now, Miss Thompson will attend all project meetings. I want daily reports on her progress. Emily grabbed her folder and gave a playful smile. Great. Since we're teammates now, can I offer a suggestion? Go ahead. Have you ever tried just taking a deep breath and not overthinking everything? Sometimes the answer is right under your nose. With that, she left the room, leaving behind a group of puzzled scientists and a CEO who couldn't decide if he was annoyed or impressed. Doctor, Harrison walked up to Alexander. Are you sure about this, boss? She's different. Alexander kept looking at the door where Emily had just exited. That's exactly why she's here, Harrison. Sometimes different is what we need. He turned to the team. Meeting at 2. I want everyone ready, and I want Miss Thompson at the table. As the team began to leave, Alexander stayed behind, staring at the board where Emily had made her elegant changes. For the first time in years, he felt genuinely curious about someone, and that bothered him more than he wanted to admit. 3 weeks later, Emily had already become a regular presence at the Harrison Innovations meetings. She always sat in the same chair at the corner of the table with her notepad and a pen she liked to spin between her fingers when she was thinking. What started as a temporary experiment was turning into something no one expected. She was actually making a difference. The problems in the learning interface, Dr. Harrison explained, pointing to a set of charts on the screen. The AI can't process conflicting data without getting stuck in a loop. The whole team stared at the numbers, frowning. 15 minutes of technical discussion had led nowhere. Emily stopped spinning her pen and raised her hand. "Can I ask a silly question?" Alexander, leaning against the wall, motioned for her to go ahead. "Why don't you just teach the AI to say I don't know?" Silence. "What do you mean?" Laura asked. "Well," Emily leaned forward, "when a kid doesn't know something, they say I don't know, and ask someone. They don't freeze. Why can't the machine do the same?" Dr. Harrison blinked a few times. "Are you suggesting we create a declared uncertainty protocol?" "I'm suggesting you stop trying to make the machine smarter than humans and let it be honest about what it can't do." Michael, the youngest scientist on the team, slapped the table. "That's brilliant. Simple, but brilliant." Emily smiled. "Thanks. Can I go back to spinning my pen now?" Low chuckles echoed around the room. Alexander watched from his corner, trying to figure out how she made it all seem so easy, and how she could make the team laugh, even during tense discussions. In the weeks that followed, that pattern repeated itself. Emily kept finding simple solutions to complex problems, always with a touch of humor that lightened the atmosphere. And Alexander, without realizing it, started noticing details he shouldn't, like how she bit her lower lip when she was focused, how her eyes lit up when she had an idea, how she didn't flinch when he stared at her, instead meeting his gaze with a half-smile that somehow made him feel both irritated and intrigued. "Mr. Alexander?" Dr. Harrison brought him back to reality. "What do you think of Emily's suggestion about the adaptive protocol?" Alexander blinked and looked at Emily, who was staring at him with one eyebrow raised. "Sorry, could you repeat that?" I said. Emily spoke slowly, like explaining to a child, that maybe we should test the new protocol in a controlled environment before rolling it out to the main system. "But it looks like you were thinking about something more important." I was paying attention. "Sure you were. I bet you can repeat everything I said in the last 5 minutes. Alexander stared at her, annoyed with himself for being distracted. "Go ahead and implement the protocol in the test environment." Next topic. Emily smiled and went back to spinning her pen, clearly pleased she'd caught him off guard. Things came to a head on Friday when Dr. Harrison announced there would be a team dinner at an upscale restaurant in downtown Boston. "It's to celebrate the project's progress," he explained. "Everyone's invited. Dress code formal." Emily looked at her plain blouse and black pants. "Formal. Formal. Or formal for someone on a secretary's salary." "Formal. Formal," Laura replied. "Like a corporate event." "Perfect. I'll show up in pajamas then." Emily. Dr. Harrison laughed. "I'm sure you'll find something appropriate." "You have touching faith in my wardrobe, Doctor." Truth was, Emily was worried. She didn't have anything close to formal wear for a corporate dinner. She spent Saturday afternoon calling her younger sister Claire, who was studying law in another city. "Borrow something from your roommate," Claire suggested. "This isn't the first time you've had to wing it." "Claire, I can't show up looking like a law firm intern." "Why not? You're basically a lab intern now. Thanks for the moral support." In the end, the neighbor from the next apartment, a teacher named Maria, lent her a navy blue dress that was classy without being flashy. Emily looked completely different. When she arrived at the restaurant on Monday night, there was a moment of awkward silence. She looked nothing like the secretary they all knew. "Emily." Michael recognized her first. "Wow, you look different." "Thank you. I'll take that as a compliment." Alexander saw her walk in and felt something strange in his stomach. It wasn't just the dress. It was the way she carried herself, as if she belonged there, even though she knew she didn't. The restaurant was elegant with dark wood tables and lit candles. Emily looked around, impressed. "What a beautiful place. How much is a salad here?" "As much as my electric bill." "Don't worry, Doctor." Harrison laughed. "The company's paying." "Oh, then I'll have the lobster." The maitre approached the group, smiling professionally. "Good evening, table 4. He paused when he saw Emily. "Sorry, ma'am. Are you joining this group, or do you have your own reservation?" "I'm with them," Emily replied, pointing to the team. The maitre d' looked a bit confused. "I see. And you are?" "Emily Thompson. I work at Harrison Innovations." "Ah. Perfect. And what's your position at the company, if you don't mind me asking?" Emily opened her mouth to answer. But Dr. Harrison spoke first. Miss Thompson is our new consultant, specializing in innovative solutions. Emily looked at him surprised, but didn't correct him. Excellent. The maitre d' smiled even more. Right this way, please. As they walked to the table, Emily whispered to Dr. Ellinger. Harrison, specialized consultant. Really? I thought it sounded better than secretary who solves problems doctors can't. You're right, much classier. During dinner, the confusion only grew. The waiter treated Emily with extra care, assuming she was an important executive. Other restaurant guests glanced at their table, clearly curious about the mysterious woman dining with the Harrison Innovations team. This is embarrassing, Emily murmured to Laura, who was sitting next to her. Why? You're doing great. I'm pretending to be someone I'm not. You're not pretending. You're just being yourself. Myself doesn't borrow dresses or eat in places where a salad costs $50. Alexander, who was sitting across from her, couldn't stop watching. There was something captivating about the way she handled everything. Completely honest about her discomfort, yet composed and witty. Emily, he said suddenly. What? What do you think of the project so far? I think you all make things way too complicated, she said. Cutting a piece of salmon, but you're getting better. Better. Over the past 2 weeks, you've spent less time arguing over impossible theories and more time testing practical solutions. That's progress. And what do you think caused that change? Emily looked at him for a moment, sensing there was more behind the question. Maybe you finally realized the most complicated answer isn't always the right one. Or maybe we just got a fresh perspective on the team. That too. The rest of the dinner went smoothly. But as they were leaving, a well-dressed woman approached the table. Excuse me, she said, speaking directly to Emily. Aren't you the new director of innovation at Harrison Innovations? Emily almost choked on her water. No, she glanced at Alexander, who looked amused. I work there, but I'm not a director. Oh, that's too bad. I heard they hired a brilliant young woman to shake things up in the department. I thought that was you. After the woman walked away, Emily turned to the group. See, this is why I shouldn't wear borrowed clothes. People start mistaking me for someone important. Who says you're not important? Alexander asked, his voice more serious than usual. Emily looked at him, surprised by his tone. For a moment, there was something in the air between them that no one else seemed to notice. Well, she finally said, if I am important, I hope it comes with a raise. The moment faded into laughter, but Alexander kept looking at her as they walked out, wondering when exactly this sharp-witted secretary had started taking up so much space in his thoughts. The following Thursday, Emily was leaving the lab carrying a stack of reports when Alexander stepped into the elevator at the same time. It was almost 7:00 the evening, and the building was nearly empty. Working late again? He asked, pressing the ground floor button. Someone has to clean up the mess you scientists make, Emily replied, adjusting the papers in her arms. Apparently, geniuses don't know how to file documents. You could have asked someone on the team to do it. I could have. But then, I'd missed the chance to complain. Alexander almost smiled. Almost. The elevator started going down normally until the 10th floor, when it suddenly jolted and stopped completely. The lights flickered twice and went out, leaving only the emergency lighting. This can't be happening, Emily muttered. Looking at the control panel, Alexander pressed the emergency button several times. Nothing. He tried the intercom. Total silence. Perfect, he said, pulling his phone from his pocket. No signal. Emily checked her phone, too. No signal here either. Great. I'm stuck in an elevator with the friendliest man in Boston. I'm not unfriendly. Of course not. You're the very picture of joy and warmth. Alexander looked at her. Your sarcasm isn't helping, and your sarcastic personality isn't either. They sat in silence for a few minutes, each trying to figure out a way out. Emily sat on the floor, leaning her back against the wall. Well, at least I've got company, she said. Could be worse. I could be stuck with someone who never stops talking. You never stop talking. Touché. Alexander stayed on his feet, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. He wasn't the kind of person who dealt well with surprises or lack of control. You going to stand there for the next 2 hours? Emily asked. 2 hours? I'm being optimistic. Could be all night. This can't happen. I have a conference call at 8. Emily laughed. Looks like you'll have to reschedule, boss. Alexander ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. Finally, he sat down on the floor on the opposite side from her. This is ridiculous. What? Being stuck in an elevator or having to sit on the floor like a normal person? Both. Welcome to the real world, Mr. Alexander. Sometimes things get out of control. I don't like when things get out of control. I noticed. You're not exactly subtle about it. They were quiet again. Emily sorted through her papers, trying to organize them. Alexander stared at the ceiling, as if he could drill a hole through it with his mind. Can I ask you something? Emily said after a few minutes. Go ahead. Why are you so intense? Alexander looked at her. Intense? You know, always serious, always in control, always looking like you're calculating your next move. Don't you ever relax? I do relax. When? In your sleep. I relax when necessary. Emily laughed. That's not relaxing. That's scheduling relaxation time. And what's wrong with that? The problem is, you live like you're constantly being judged, like you have to prove something all the time. Alexander stayed quiet for a moment. Something in the way she said it hit home. Maybe because I am constantly being judged. By who? Everyone. The company, the investors, the employees, and by yourself. Alexander looked at her. It was a simple question. But it made him uncomfortable, especially by myself. Why? Because that's how I was raised. My father always made it clear that success wasn't optional. It was mandatory. Emily tilted her head. What do you mean? Alexander sighed. He wasn't used to talking about his personal life, especially not with employees, but something about being trapped in a dark elevator made it feel okay to let his guard down. My father built a small financial empire. When I was a kid, he always told me I had to be better than him, smarter, more successful, more focused. Feelings were distractions. Relationships were unnecessary risks. What a cheerful life philosophy. It worked. Look where I am today, stuck in a broken elevator talking to your secretary. Alexander almost smiled. Not exactly how I imagined my Thursday night. And how did you imagine it? Working, always working. Emily shook her head. That's sad. You know what is? You have a successful company, money, power, and your idea of a perfect evening is working alone in the office. And what's your idea of a perfect evening? Emily thought for a moment. Anything that involves laughing with people I like, maybe watching a bad movie and making fun of it, or cooking something tasty and eating too much. Simple stuff. Simple. Yeah, you should try it sometime. Try what? Doing something just because it's fun, not because it brings money or status or any other measurable benefit. Alexander thought about that. And you? Have you always been this easygoing? Emily laughed. Easygoing? Me? You don't know me at all. What do you mean? I'm working 2 jobs to pay for my sister's education. I live in an apartment that barely fits one person because that's all I can afford. I borrow clothes for company dinners. My life is a constant mess. But you seem content, because I am most of the time. How? Because I chose the complications in my life. I chose to work extra to help Claire. I chose to live in a small apartment to save money. I chose to be here at this company trying to make a difference. And when you don't choose, like now stuck in this elevator with you. Exactly. Emily shrugged. Then I just do the best I can with the situation and try to find something funny in it. What's funny about being stuck in an elevator? Well, it's the first real conversation we've had since I started working here. All it took was a power failure for you to remember I'm a person. Alexander looked at her. Really looked at her. Maybe for the first time. She was sitting on the floor of a broken elevator, her hair slightly messy and an ironic smile on her face. And still, she looked completely at ease. You're not afraid of anything, are you? I'm afraid of plenty of things. I'm afraid I won't be able to help my sister achieve her dream. I'm afraid of spending my whole life being underestimated. I'm afraid of waking up one day and realizing I wasted too much time being practical and forgot to live. But you don't show it, because showing fear never helped anyone. It's better to laugh at tough situations than cry over them. Alexander felt something strange happening in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. It was like something frozen inside him had started to melt. You're unexpected. Thank you. I'll take that as a compliment. They looked at each other for a moment that seemed to last longer than it should have. There was something in the air, a tension different from the usual banter between them. Alexander leaned in slightly, and Emily didn't look away. Emily, he began, his voice lower than usual. Yes. He was getting closer, and she wasn't moving back. He stopped just inches from her face. Suddenly, the lights came back on. The elevator jolted and began to move again. The moment dissolved instantly. Alexander pulled back, running a hand through his hair, clearly embarrassed. Emily blinked a few times, trying to process what had almost happened. Looks like we're back to normal operation, she said, her voice slightly. Looks like it. The elevator reached the ground floor, and the doors opened. Alexander stood up quickly and offered his hand to help her up. When their hands touched, they both felt a kind of electric shock. "Thank you," Emily murmured. "You're welcome." They stepped out of the elevator in silence. In the lobby, they stopped and looked at each other, not quite sure what to say. "Well," Emily finally said, "that was an interesting experience." "It was. See you tomorrow then." "See you tomorrow." Emily started walking toward the exit, but then stopped and turned around. "Alexander, about what you said about your father and about success. You know you don't have to prove anything to anyone, right?" Alexander looked at her for a long moment. "Good night, Emily. Good night." She left the building, and Alexander stood in the lobby, watching her through the glass doors until she disappeared into the crowd outside. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure of anything. On Friday morning, Emily arrived at the office as usual, carrying her coffee and with a slightly brighter expression than normal. The elevator conversation the night before had created a different atmosphere between her and Alexander, and even without fully understanding what had happened, she felt hopeful. That feeling lasted exactly 15 minutes. Laura came running down the hallway, her face pale and a tablet in her hands. "Emily, you need to see this," she said without even saying hello. "Good morning to you too, Laura. What's going on? Did someone hack our system? Worse. Much worse." Laura handed over the tablet. On the screen was an article from the Boston Business Journal with the headline, "Secretary without a college degree solves problem 15 PhDs couldn't at Harrison Innovations." Emily felt her stomach drop. How did they find out? Someone leaked it. The article has details only insiders would know. Emily read quickly. The article wasn't exactly mean-spirited, but its tone was condescending, treating her like a curiosity and interesting anomaly. Even worse, it mentioned her humble background and her lack of proper academic qualifications. "This is going to cause trouble," Laura murmured. "It already is." The two of them rushed to the lab where the whole team was gathered around a computer. "Doctor," Harrison looked at Emily with a mix of concern and embarrassment. "Emily, I'm sorry. We don't know how this got out." "Let me guess," she said, walking closer to the screen. "It got worse." Michael pointed to the monitor where several tabs were open. The article was republished by 3 tech websites. And well, social media exploded. Emily looked at the comments and felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. Most of them were harsh and full of prejudice. "This is the quality of experts at Harrison Innovations now. A janitor solving AI problems. What a joke. Probably just luck. Anyone can guess a right answer sometimes. Harrison Innovations must be desperate to hire just anyone." There were worse comments, some questioning her abilities, some making fun of her appearance, and some that were just mean for no reason. "Guys," Emily said, forcing a smile, "you know, I've heard worse, right? I'm not going to fall apart because of some online comments." But even as she spoke, she felt the weight of each cruel word. This wasn't just about her. It was about everyone like her. People without fancy degrees, but with something valuable to offer. Alexander walked into the lab at that moment, clearly angry. "Can someone explain to me how confidential company info ended up in a news article?" "Boss, Doctor," Harrison began, "we're trying to find out. I don't want excuses. I want solutions." He looked at Emily. "I'm sorry about this. I'll sue the paper if I have to." "You're not suing anyone," Emily said, surprising everyone. "What do you mean? They didn't publish anything false. I really am a secretary without a college degree. I really did solve a problem the PhDs couldn't. Those are facts. But the tone of the article, the tone is their problem, not ours. And suing will just bring more attention to the story." Alexander stared at her, clearly frustrated that she wouldn't let him fix the situation. "Emily, this will blow over. In a week, no one will even remember." "Oh, they'll remember," she replied. "But that's not the issue." "Then what is?" Emily looked around the room at all the faces watching her with a mix of pity and discomfort. "The problem is that you're all looking at me like I'm a victim who needs protecting. Like I can't handle this on my own." "That's not true," Laura said. "It is. You feel sorry for me. Poor little secretary getting bullied by the internet." Alexander stepped forward. "Emily, it's normal for us to care. You're part of the team." "Am I?" She looked him straight in the eye. "Because yesterday, you all treated me like a fun little mystery, and today, like a child who needs shielding. That's not fair, isn't it? Then why is everyone walking on eggshells around me? Why isn't anyone joking around like usual? Why do you think I can't handle a little criticism?" The room was heavy with silence. Emily was right, and everyone knew it. "Look," she went on, her voice calmer now. "I appreciate the concern. I really do. But I don't need you to defend me. I need you to see me as an equal." Alexander frowned. "That's how I see you." "No, Alexander. You see me as a puzzle to figure out. An interesting case to solve. But not as a colleague. That's not." "Yes, it is. And you know how I can tell? Because if it were Dr. Harrison being attacked online, you wouldn't be offering to sue the paper. You just tell him to ignore it and move on." Alexander opened his mouth to object, then closed it again. She was right. "So, what do you want me to do?" he asked. "I want you to stop trying to rescue me and start treating me like someone who can rescue herself." The tension in the room was thick. Michael cleared his throat. "Emily, maybe we should hold a team meeting to talk about how to handle this." "No," she said, grabbing her bag. "You hold the meeting. I'm going home now." "Doctor," Harrison asked, "but we have the presentation on Monday. You'll have to do it without me." Alexander stepped forward, alarmed. "Emily, you can't just walk out." "Yes, I can and I will. I need a few days to think." "Think about what?" "About whether it's worth continuing to be treated like a circus act instead of a professional." "No one's treating you like that." Emily let out a laugh that there was no humor in it. "Alexander, this morning, 3 people stopped me in the hallway to ask if I was okay after the article. Like I'm some fragile figurine who could break at any moment. Last night in the elevator, you spoke to me like I was a person. Today, you're treating me like some noble cause. That's not what I— Yes, it is, and I'm tired of it." Emily walked toward the door, but stopped before leaving. "You know what's funny? The comments online didn't hurt as much as the way you're all reacting. At least the internet trolls are honest about not taking me seriously." With that, she walked out, leaving behind an awkward silence. Alexander stood still for a few seconds trying to process what had just happened. Then he ran after her. "Emily, wait." She was in the elevator pressing the close button repeatedly. "Emily, what do you want, Alexander?" "You're right about everything." The elevator door started to close. "I know I am," she said. "That's why I'm leaving." Alexander put his hand in the door to stop it from closing. "For how long?" "I don't know. Maybe for good." "You can't." "I can, and I will." She gently removed his hand from the door and pressed the button again. "Emily, we need you. You need my insights, not me. Those are 2 different things. They're not." "Yes, they are, and until you understand the difference, it's better I stay away." The doors closed, leaving Alexander alone in the hallway. In the days that followed, Emily's absence was felt by the entire team, not just because her contributions were missed, but because the atmosphere in the lab had completely changed. Meetings were more tense, solutions less creative, and there was a general feeling that something important was missing. Alexander tried calling her twice, but she didn't answer. Dr. Harrison suggested sending flowers, but Alexander knew that would only make things worse. On Tuesday, Laura found him looking out the window toward the parking lot. "She's not back yet." "No. Are you going after her?" Alexander sighed. "She made it pretty clear she doesn't want to be treated like someone who needs saving. But you miss her." It wasn't a question. Laura had noticed how distracted Alexander had been, how he looked at Emily's empty chair during meetings, how his expression had become even darker than usual. "Everyone misses her," he replied. But his voice wasn't convincing. "Alexander, can I be honest?" "Go ahead. You don't miss her as a colleague. You miss her," as Alexander kept staring out the window without answering. But Laura was right, and he knew it. The question was, what was he going to do about it? On Monday morning, a week after the incident, Alexander was in the meeting room preparing documents for the most important presentation of the quarter. The investors from Bennett Capital would arrive in 2 hours, and the project depended on that meeting. He had spent the entire weekend going over numbers, charts, and projections, trying to make up for Emily's absence with extra work. The whole team was nervous. Dr. Harrison arrived earlier than usual. Laura had reviewed the presentation 3 times, and Michael was pacing like a caged animal. "Are you sure we can do this without her?" Michael asked for the 5th time in 20 minutes. "We'll have to," Alexander replied, though his own confidence was shaken. In the last few days, he had realized just how much they relied on Emily's unique perspective. Without her, solutions seemed more complicated, explanations less clear, and there was a lack of creative energy he didn't know how to replace. "The investors are known to be demanding," Dr. Harrison said nervously, adjusting his glasses. "They like to question every detail." "That's exactly why we need to be ready for anything," Alexander said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. That's when the meeting room door opened and Emily walked in like nothing had happened. "Good morning, everyone. I hope I'm not late for the most important meeting of the quarter." The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone looked at her as if they were seeing a ghost. "Emily," Dr. Harrison was the first to speak. "You back?" "Looks like it. Unless this is some group hallucination." She placed her bag on the chair and looked around the room. "Wow. What a gloomy mood. Have the investors arrived and rejected everything already?" Alexander stared at her, trying to process the mix of relief and confusion he was feeling all at once. "You disappeared for an entire week." "I didn't disappear. I took a few days to think." She pulled out a chair and sat down. "And I came to some interesting conclusions." "Like what?" Laura asked. "Like the fact that you all really need me?" Emily smiled. "I'm not trying to brag, but from what I heard in the hallway, the week wasn't exactly productive." Michael laughed nervously. "It was a bit challenging." "I can imagine." Emily looked at Alexander. "And you? Did you survive without someone to disagree with your brilliant ideas?" "Barely," he admitted. And there was something in his voice she didn't expect. Sincerity. "Well, I'm here now, and I have a few ideas on how to improve the presentation." "Emily," Dr. Harrison interrupted. "The presentation is already done. The investors arrive in less than 2 hours." 2 hours? She looked at the clock. "Perfect. Just enough time to make some adjustments." "What kind of adjustments?" Alexander asked, intrigued. Despite his caution, Emily got up and walked to the whiteboard where the main points of the presentation were listed. "First, you're starting with numbers. Classic mistake. Investors don't fall in love with numbers. They fall in love with stories." "What story?" Michael asked. "The story of how a brilliant team solved an impossible problem in a way no one expected." She picked up a marker and started drawing. "Second, you're over-explaining the technology. They don't need to understand how it works. They need to understand why it's going to make money." Laura frowned. "But they'll ask technical questions." "Of course they will, and we'll answer them. But not with 20 minutes of explaining algorithms they won't understand." Emily turned to the team. "Trust me. I spent the last week researching Bennett Capital. I know exactly what they want to hear." Alexander crossed his arms. "And you did this research because even though I was mad at you all, I wasn't going to let this company lose $1 million contract over a poorly structured presentation." She gave a wry smile. "Consider it my gift of sorry for disappearing during the most important week of the year." In the next 2 hours, Emily completely transformed the presentation. She reorganized the structure, simplified the charts, created analogies even a child could understand, and rehearsed with the team until everyone felt confident. "Remember," she said as they waited for the investors to arrive, "you're not asking for money. You're offering a unique opportunity. There's a difference." When Victor Bennett and his team walked into the meeting room, Emily immediately felt the shift in the atmosphere. They had that posture of people used to hearing pitches and turning them down before the coffee even cooled. "Mr. Alexander," Bennett greeted Alexander with a firm handshake. "I've heard interesting things about your project. I'm sure you'll be even more interested after our presentation." Alexander replied. Leading the group to the table, Emily watched the investors take their seats. There were 3 of them. Bennett, the leader, a man in his early 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes. Sophia Lee, an Asian woman in her 40s known for asking questions that made CEOs sweat. And Nathan Brooks, the young analyst who seemed to be there mostly to take notes and look intimidating. "Before we begin," Bennett said, "I'd like to meet the whole team." Alexander introduced everyone. When he got to Emily, she noticed a slight pause. "And this is Emily Thompson, our specialist in innovative solutions." Emily almost laughed at the description, but kept her composure. "Nice to meet you," she said, shaking hands with each investor. Sophia Lee looked at her with curiosity. "Miss Thompson, what's your academic background?" The question Emily had been expecting, the one that could ruin everything before they even started. "I have a high school diploma and 2 years of business school," she replied without hesitation. "But what really qualifies me to be here is the fact that I solved in 3 minutes a problem that 15 PhDs couldn't solve in 3 weeks." The room fell silent. Emily kept her smile, waiting for the reaction. "Interesting," Bennett finally said. "I'm looking forward to hearing that story." Alexander let out a quiet sigh of relief and started the presentation. He followed Emily's script exactly, opening with the story of the impossible problem and how the team had found an unexpected solution. "The interesting thing," he said, clicking to the next slide, "is that sometimes the best solutions come from where we least expect." Sophia Lee interrupted. "Mr. Alexander, may I ask specifically what Miss Thompson contributed to the project?" Emily leaned forward. "I can answer that myself if you don't mind." "Please," Bennett said. clearly interested. Well, Emily began, while the team was trying to force a complex solution on what they assumed was a complex problem, I simplified the approach. Sometimes when you're too close to a problem, you lose perspective. I offered the view of someone on the outside. Can you be more specific? Nathan Brooks asked, looking up from his notes for the first time. Emily smiled. Sure. Imagine you're trying to open a locked door using a hammer, a screwdriver, and a blowtorch. You spend hours trying different combinations of these tools. I came in, turned the doorknob, and the door opened. The door wasn't locked, Sophia asked. Exactly. Everyone assumed it was. But no one actually checked. Bennett laughed. That's an excellent analogy. Does this happen often in your project? More than we'd like to admit, Dr. Harrison answered. Emily has a special talent for finding simple solutions to complex problems, and do you believe that's something you can replicate? Nathan asked. Or are you relying entirely on spontaneous inspiration? Emily stood up and walked over to the whiteboard. Can I show an example? Please, Bennett said. Emily quickly drew out an optimization problem the team had solved the previous week. This came up last Thursday. The team spent 6 hours trying to optimize a learning algorithm. She drew several attempts at solutions. They were functional but inefficient. And what was your solution? Sophia asked. I asked why we needed to optimize the algorithm instead of just using less data. Emily drew a simplified version. Result: same performance. 50% faster processing. Impressive. Bennett murmured. What's really impressive, Emily continued, is that this kind of approach can be systematized. It's not magic. It's just a matter of always asking, are we overcomplicating this? Nathan took several notes. Miss Thompson, what led you to work in this field without a technical background? Necessity, she answered. Honestly, I needed a job, and they needed a secretary. But I found I had a knack for spotting patterns and simplifying problems, and honestly, sometimes not having a technical background is an advantage. How so? Sophia asked. Because I don't know that certain things are impossible. No one taught me that some problems require complex solutions, so I try the simple one first. Bennett leaned forward. Mr. Alexander, what is Miss Thompson's specific role moving forward on the project? Alexander looked at Emily, and she realized he was letting her decide. I'm going to keep doing what I do best, she said, simplifying the complicated and questioning the unquestionable. The presentation continued for another 40 minutes, with Emily contributing naturally whenever needed. She answered questions with honesty and humor, created analogies that made complex ideas easy to understand, and showed an intuitive grasp of the business that impressed even the team. When it ended, Bennett and his team stepped out to deliberate. The wait was tense, but Emily seemed calm. How are you so relaxed? Michael asked. Because we did our best. The rest isn't up to us. 15 minutes later, the investors returned. Mr. Alexander, Bennett said, we have a proposal for you. Alexander's heart sped up. We're prepared to invest $12 million in the project, Bennett continued. But we have one condition. What is it? Alexander asked. Bennett looked directly at Emily. Miss Thompson needs to be formally involved in the project, not as an assistant or observer, but as an integral part of the leadership team. Emily blinked, surprised. I'm not sure I understand. You understand perfectly, Sophia smiled. We want you to be officially responsible for making sure the solutions stay practical and implementable. A role we might call Director of Strategic Simplification. Emily looked at Alexander, who seemed just as surprised as she was. This is unexpected, she said. Miss Thompson, Bennett said, in 30 years of investing in tech, I've rarely seen anyone with your ability to turn complexity into clarity. That's worth a lot. Emily laughed. Well, when you put it that way, I accept. The room filled with smiles and handshakes. As everyone celebrated, Alexander came up to Emily. Director of Strategic Simplification, he whispered. Nice title, don't you think? She whispered back. And apparently it comes with a substantial raise. Emily, about last week, Lothar, Alexander. Right now, let's celebrate the fact that a secretary without a college degree just brought $12 million into your company. She stepped away to accept congratulations from the team, leaving Alexander alone with his thoughts and a growing feeling that his life had just completely changed. The celebration started spontaneously in the lab. Dr. Harrison had bought cheap champagne from the store on the corner. Laura brought cupcakes from the cafe, and Michael pulled together a playlist on the computer. It wasn't exactly a glamorous party, but there was a contagious energy in the air. A toast. Dr. Harrison raised a plastic cup filled with champagne. "To our new director of strategic simplification, and to the $12 million," Michael added, "and to proof that diplomas aren't everything." Laura laughed. Emily raised her own cup, feeling strangely emotional. "A toast to all of you, for letting me be myself, even when myself is a little crazy." "A little," Alexander said from his corner, and everyone laughed. The improvised party lasted about an hour. Gradually, people began to leave. Harrison had dinner plans with his wife. Laura had to pick up her son from school, and Michael had a guitar class at 7. "You two staying to lock up, Doctor?" Harrison asked Alexander and Emily. "Sure," Alexander replied. "We'll just finish tidying up a few things." "Perfect. And Emily, congratulations again. You deserve every bit of this new position." When the last person left, Emily and Alexander were alone in the lab. Music still played softly, and plastic cups were scattered on the tables. Emily began cleaning up the mess, humming along to the music. "You don't have to do that," Alexander said. "The cleaning crew comes in an hour." "Old habits," she replied, stacking the cups. "Besides, I'm not used to this whole director thing yet. Might take a while, Emily." "Yes. About what you said last week. You were right." Emily stopped picking up cups and looked at him. "About which part?" "I said a lot of true things that day. About me not seeing you as an equal." "Oh, that?" She went back to tidying up. "Well, to be fair, you've improved quite a bit. You're the one who made me better." "That wasn't me. You chose to improve." "That's different." Alexander stepped closer to her, picking up some cups to help. "Why did you come back?" "Because even though I was upset, I like working here." Emily smiled. "And because I have a sister in law school who appreciates when I land substantial raises." "Is that the only reason?" Emily stopped what she was doing and looked at him. "Why do you want to know?" "Curiosity." "Huh?" She leaned against the table, arms crossed. "Well, since you asked, I came back because I realized you all really need me. Not just to solve problems, but to humanize the place." "Humanize? Yes, you're all brilliant. But sometimes you forget that you're building technology for regular people. People who don't have PhDs and don't speak in algorithms over breakfast. And you remind us of that. Someone has to do that job." Alexander laughed, and Emily noticed it was a real laugh, not the polite half-smile he usually gave. "What?" she asked. You closed a $12 million deal today, got promoted to a position that didn't even exist yesterday, and you're here picking up plastic cups like nothing changed." "Because nothing has changed. Alexander, I'm still the same person, just with a fancier title." "That's not true." "Why not? You proved today that you can accomplish anything you want. You could work anywhere, negotiate any salary." He paused. "You could leave at any time." Emily tilted her head, studying his expression. "Does that worry you? Should it worry me?" "You tell me," I asked first. Alexander ran his hand through his hair, a gesture Emily had learned to recognize as a sign he was uncomfortable. "Yes, it worries me." "Why?" "Because," he hesitated, "because this company would be a lot more boring without you. Boring, predictable, too serious, without life." Emily smiled. "Alexander, did you just admit you need me to bring life to your workplace?" "I did." "That's almost a compliment." "It is a compliment." They looked at each other for a moment. The music had shifted to something slower, and the late afternoon light came through the windows, creating a strangely intimate atmosphere in the empty lab. "You know," Emily said, "in the elevator last week, I thought you were going to..." "Going to what?" "Nothing." "Forget it, Emily. I thought you were going to kiss me." Her honesty caught him off guard. Alexander went very quiet for a few seconds. "And what if I had tried?" "I don't know." She shrugged. "I guess it would depend on how convincing you were." "Convincing?" "Well, you're not exactly known for your romantic spontaneity, Alexander. I imagine it would all be very calculated and logical." "You think so?" "I'm sure you'd probably make a list of pros and cons before making a decision." Alexander took a step forward. "And what would be the cons?" Emily realized he was closer now, and she felt her heartbeat a little faster. "Well, you're my boss. That complicates things. And the pros?" "The pros?" Emily laughed nervously. "Who said there would be any pros?" "You said it would depend on how convincing I was. That implies there's a chance you could be convinced." "Maybe." She teased him with a smile. "But you'd have to be very convincing." Alexander took another step. Now they were standing very close, and Emily could smell his cologne, see the details in his eyes she had never noticed before. "Emily." "Yes, you talk too much." And then he kissed her. It wasn't calculated. It wasn't logical. It was impulsive and warm and completely unexpected. Emily was surprised for a second before kissing him back, her hands automatically finding their way to his shoulders. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathing a little faster. That was Emily began. Convincing, Alexander finished. Very convincing. She smiled. Surprisingly convincing. Emily. She placed a finger on his lips. Don't ruin the moment by overthinking it. But we need to talk about tomorrow. We can talk tomorrow. They kissed again, slower this time. And Emily felt like something inside her had finally been released. All the teasing, all the tension, all the glances that lasted just a little too long finally made sense. When they pulled apart again, Alexander looked at her like he was trying to memorize the moment. Are you sure you want to wait until tomorrow to talk? I'm sure. Emily smiled. Trust me, some things are better when they're not planned. The next morning, Emily walked into the office with a different kind of energy. There was something in her step, in her smile that hadn't been there before. She greeted the receptionist more cheerfully than usual and headed up to the lab with a sense of anticipation. Alexander was already there as always, but when she walked into the room, he barely looked up from the papers he was reviewing. Good morning, she said, with a smile she couldn't hide. Good morning, he replied, formal and distant. Emily waited for something more. A smile, a glance, any sign that he remembered what had happened the night before. Nothing. How's the Bennett project? She asked, stepping closer to his desk. Fine. Dr. Harrison is finalizing the contracts. Great. Silence. Emily frowned. Something was off. The Alexander from last night had vanished, replaced by the cold, professional version she'd known since day one. Alexander. About last night. Last night was a celebration. We were all excited. The way he said it like he was explaining a temporary lapse in judgment made Emily's stomach sink. Excited? The contract. The promotion. The champagne. It was a special night. It was, but now we need to focus on work. There's a lot to do with the new investment. Emily watched him for a long moment. He was avoiding eye contact, keeping his eyes on the documents. Of course, she finally said, work. For the rest of the morning, Alexander kept a professional distance that cut like a knife. He was polite, efficient, and completely impersonal, as if the kisses from the night before had been a dream. At lunch, Emily went looking for Laura. Can I ask you something? Of course. Does Alexander always get weird after personal situations? Laura looked at her curiously. What kind of personal situations? Hypothetical ones. Oh, Laura smiled. Hypothetical situations involving you and our dear CEO. Maybe Emily Alexander is terrified of anything he can't control or predict, and relationships definitely fall into that category. So, he always runs when things get real. Always. It's like he has an emotional panic button. Emily sighed. That's frustrating. What happened? Nothing, apparently. In the afternoon, Emily tried once more. She waited until everyone had left for lunch and went to speak with Alexander in his office. I need to talk to you about the project about last night. Alexander finally looked at her, but his expression was closed. Emily, I think it would be best if we considered what happened yesterday as a lapse in judgment. The words hit Emily like a slap in the face. A lapse in judgment. We worked together. You were just promoted. It would be complicated if... If what? If you admitted you feel something for me. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. It's written all over your face. Alexander stood up and walked to the window, turning his back to her. Emily, you're smart, talented, and you have a bright future in this company. Don't let personal complications get in the way of that. Personal complications? You know what I mean. Emily stayed quiet for a long moment, processing the rejection. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, but Alexander could hear the disappointment beneath her composure. You know, Alexander, for a moment yesterday, I thought I had seen a different version of you, one that wasn't afraid to feel something real. Emily, but I was wrong. You're exactly who I thought you were in the beginning. Cold, calculating, unable to let yourself be human. That's not fair, isn't it? She turned to face him. You kissed me yesterday. It wasn't just the champagne. It wasn't just the excitement. You kissed me because you wanted to. And now you're pretending it was a mistake. Maybe it was. Fine. Emily nodded, a cold resolution forming in her eyes. If it was a mistake, then I'm going to fix another mistake I made. What mistake? Thinking I could work for someone who doesn't even have the courage to admit his own feelings. Alexander turned to her alarmed. What are you saying? I'm saying you can keep your project, your lab, and your perfectly controlled life, I'm out. Emily, don't be dramatic. I'm not being dramatic. I'm being practical. You made it clear. You don't want personal complications. Well, the biggest personal complication here is me. You can't just leave. You were just promoted. I can and I will. Emily walked toward the door. I'll type up my resignation right now. 2 weeks' notice as required. Emily, wait. She stopped at the door without turning around. Unless you want to tell me that last night meant something to you, we have nothing else to talk about. Alexander stayed silent, struggling with himself. Emily waited a few seconds before shaking her head. That's what I thought. And she walked out of the office, leaving Alexander alone with his decisions and his fears, while she went to write the letter that would end everything before it even started. 2 weeks had passed since Emily submitted her resignation, and Alexander discovered that working without her was like trying to breathe with only half your lungs. Everything worked technically, but there was a constant feeling that something essential was missing. He tried to focus on preparations for the Global Tech Conference, the most important tech event of the year. Being the keynote speaker was an honor Alexander had earned after years building up Harrison Innovations' reputation. But every time he rehearsed his presentation, it felt empty, too technical. Lacking the spark Emily always brought to the projects, the presentation is perfect, Dr. Harrison said for the 10th time, reviewing the slides. You're going to do great. Alexander murmured, looking out the window of the hotel in San Francisco where the event was taking place. Boss, are you all right? You've seemed distracted ever since. Ever since our director of strategic simplification decided to simplify her life by leaving the company, Alexander finished bitterly. She could still change her mind. Today's the last day of her notice period. Alexander shook his head. Emily doesn't change her mind once she's made a decision. It's one of the things I respected about her. Meanwhile, in her small apartment in Boston, Emily was watching the live stream of the conference while packing the last of her things from the office into a box. Officially, her last day at Harrison Innovations had ended 2 hours ago, but she couldn't bring herself to turn off the TV. You really shouldn't be watching this, her sister Claire said on the phone. Just professional curiosity, Emily lied, turning up the volume. I want to see if he can explain our project without using 15 technical terms per sentence. Emily, you're torturing yourself. I'm not. I'm checking if I made the right decision. And did you? Emily stayed quiet for a moment, watching the screen where Alexander was being introduced as the next speaker. Ask me tomorrow. On stage at the Moscone Center, Alexander adjusted the microphone and looked out at the audience of over 3,000 people. CEOs, investors, tech journalists, fellow speakers. It was the kind of event he usually handled with ease. Good afternoon, he began. I'm Alexander, CEO of Harrison Innovations, and today I'm going to talk about the future of adaptive artificial intelligence. So far, so good. Alexander clicked to the first slide and continued. Our company has developed a revolutionary protocol that allows AI to process conflicting data without entering processing loops. He stopped. The words felt too technical, empty. He could see some faces in the audience, starting to show that glazed expression Emily always said people made when they didn't understand what he was talking about. This protocol uses supervised learning algorithms that Alexander froze completely. He stood still on stage, looking out at an audience of 3,000 people, unable to remember what came next. Back at the apartment, Emily sat up on the couch. Oh no, he froze. Who froze? Claire asked. Alexander? He's doing that thing he always does when he tries to explain technology without using simple examples. He sounds like a tech manual. Emily could see the exact moment Alexander realized he had completely lost his train of thought. He looked at his notes, then at the audience, then at the slides, clearly searching for a way to get back on track. Sorry, he said into the microphone. Let me start over. But when he tried again, the words came out even more technical, even more complicated. It was as if the more nervous he got, the more he hid behind terminology only experts would understand. Emily couldn't watch any longer. She hung up the phone with Claire, grabbed her car keys, and rushed out the door. 40 minutes later, she was sneaking in through the back of the Moscone Center. As a former Harrison Innovations employee who had helped prepare the presentation, she managed to convince security to let her through. On stage, Alexander was clearly struggling. His presentation had turned into a series of complex graphs and explanations that even he didn't seem to believe in anymore. The adaptive processing module implements machine learning protocols using convolutional neural networks. 2. Emily appeared quietly at the side of the stage. Alexander saw her, and for a moment he looked even more lost. She gestured for him to keep talking and walked over silently. When she got to his side, She whispered in his ear, "Stop trying to sound smart and start sounding human. Remember our conversation about the AI that learns to say I don't know?" Alexander looked at her, surprised, but something changed in his expression. Relief, recognition. "You know," he said to the audience, smiling for the first time since he stepped on stage, "my former director of strategic simplification always told me I made things too complicated." Soft laughter echoed through the audience. "So, let me explain our project in a simpler way." He looked at Emily, who gave him an encouraging nod. "Imagine you're trying to teach a very smart child how to make decisions. The problem is, that child always wants to be absolutely sure before doing anything." The audience was paying attention now. Our solution was to teach the child to say, "I don't know," when they're unsure, and to ask for help instead of freezing up. Emily smiled and started to walk off the stage, but Alexander continued, "The person who came up with this idea doesn't have a PhD, didn't study computer science, but she understood something that 15 specialists couldn't see. Sometimes the simplest solution is the best one." Emily stopped, surprised to realize he was talking about her to an audience of 3,000 people. You know why she was able to solve the problem? Because she didn't know it was supposed to be impossible. No one had told her that certain solutions don't work. Alexander was in his element now, telling the story of the project in a way that everyone could understand and relate to. "This person taught me that innovation doesn't always come from making things more complex. Sometimes it comes from making them more human." The presentation continued for another 20 minutes, with Alexander explaining complex concepts using simple analogies, telling stories instead of listing specs, and keeping the audience engaged from start to finish. When he finished, the audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted almost 2 full minutes. Backstage, Emily leaned against the wall, watching Alexander receive congratulations from other speakers and event organizers. She was about to slip away quietly when he saw her. "Emily, you came. I saw you freeze on TV and thought you might need help." "I did." He stepped closer. "Thank you." "You're welcome. It was a good presentation. Once you stop sounding like a technical manual." "Emily, about what I said on stage, you didn't have to do that. Talking about me in front of all those people. I did need to because it was true." They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the event buzzing around them. "How are you?" Alexander asked. "Good. Better than I expected." Emily smiled. "And you?" "Terrible. Absolutely terrible. Because of the presentation. It went great after." "It's not because of the presentation," Alexander interrupted her. "It's because of you, Alexander." "Emily, these past 2 weeks have been the worst of my professional life. And not because you're missing from the project, it's because you're missing from my life." Emily looked at him, seeing something different in his eyes, a vulnerability she had never seen before. "I spent my whole life trying to control everything. My feelings, my relationships, my work, everything had to be predictable and manageable. And then I showed up and messed it all up. You showed up and made me realize that a fully controlled life is a completely empty one." Emily crossed her arms, shielding herself. "And what do you want me to do with that information?" "I want you to know you were right about everything. I am cold, calculated, and scared of feeling anything real." "And has that changed?" "Not completely. I'm still scared. But now I'm more afraid of losing you than I am of getting hurt." Emily studied his face, looking for signs. This was just another moment of emotion he'd deny the next day. "Alexander, the last time we had this conversation, you decided it was better to keep things professional. Last time my breath was afraid. I still am. But I've realized something." "What?" "You're the only person who makes me want to be less of a CEO and more of a human being." Emily felt something stir in her chest, but she didn't lower her guard completely. "And what exactly does that mean?" "It means I want to try for real this time. No running when things get complicated. No pretending my feelings are just a moment of excitement. And if it doesn't work, then at least we'll know we tried." Emily looked at him for a long moment, seeing in his eyes a sincerity she had hoped to see for weeks. "Alexander, do you have any idea how frustrating it is to care about someone who's afraid to care back?" "Now I do." "And are you sure you're ready to stop running every time things get real?" "I'm not sure about anything, Emily, except that I don't want to live without you anymore." Emily sighed, feeling her defenses begin to soften. "You're really impossible. You know that." "I know. And you have terrible timing for important conversations." "I know. And you'll probably drive me crazy." "Probably." Emily shook her head, but a smile was beginning to form on her lips. "Well, at least you're being honest about your flaws. It's a start." "It might be." 3 days after the conference, Emily was sitting at her favorite cafe near her apartment, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly while looking at an envelope on the table. Inside, it was an opportunity that could completely change her life. A full scholarship to finish her business degree at the University of Chicago with a focus on innovation management. The irony wasn't lost on her. After proving she didn't need a degree to be valuable, she was now being offered the chance to earn exactly that. Her phone rang. It was Laura. "Emily, you need to come back. The office is a mess without you." "Laura, I already left the company. Remember? But you can come back." Alexander is completely lost. Yesterday, he spent 2 hours trying to explain the Bennett project to a client, and the guy left more confused than when he arrived. Emily laughed despite herself. "That doesn't surprise me one bit. He needs you, Emily. We all do. You'll be fine. Dr. Harrison is perfectly capable of keeping things running. Dr. Harrison understands the technology, but you understood the people. There's a difference." Emily looked again at the envelope. "Laura, can I tell you something?" "Of course. I got a scholarship offer, full ride in Chicago." "Emily, that's amazing. You deserve it." "Thank you. The thing is, I'm thinking about accepting it." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Because of Alexander? Because of me?" "Emily, I need to figure out who I am when I'm not always reacting to situations. When I'm not the one solving everyone else's problems, and you think Chicago is the answer. I think distance is the answer, at least for a while." That afternoon, Emily went to Harrison Innovations to pick up the last thing she had left at her desk. The building felt oddly quiet, and she realized she felt a pang of nostalgia for the hallways she had walked through every day. She was putting her favorite mug into her bag when Alexander appeared in the lab doorway. "Laura told me you were here. Just came to pick up a few things." Emily held up the mug. "This mug's been with me for 3 years. I couldn't leave it behind." "Emily, about our conversation in San Francisco." "Alexander, no. You don't even know what I was going to say." "Yes, I do. You were going to say you thought things over. That maybe we could try something. That you want to give me a chance." Emily turned to face him. "Am I right?" Alexander looked at her, surprised by her accuracy. "Exactly right. And do you know how I know? Because you're predictable. You always want what you can't have, and lose interest in what's right in front of you. That's not true, isn't it? When I was here working with you every day, you treated me like a colleague at best. Now that I'm gone, suddenly I'm the one you don't want to lose." Alexander opened his mouth to protest, but closed it again. There was too much truth in her words. "Emily, I know I made mistakes." "They weren't mistakes, Alexander. They were choices, and now I'm making mine." "What choices?" Emily took a deep breath. "I accepted a scholarship to finish college in Chicago." Alexander looked genuinely shocked. "For how long?" 2 years. Maybe more if I go for grad school." "Emily, you can't just—" "Yes, I can, and I will." Alexander ran a hand through his hair. That familiar gesture of frustration. "Why Chicago? Why not a university here in Boston?" "Because I need distance from you, this company, this whole situation." "I don't understand." Emily sat on the edge of the table. "Alexander, I spent months here proving I'm capable, that I have value, that I can contribute, and it worked. I earned the team's respect, impressed investors, got promoted." "Exactly. You had everything here. I had everything except the one thing I really wanted." "What's that?" "You." Her honesty caught him off guard. "I wanted you to see me, not as a talented employee, not as someone who could solve technical problems, but as a woman you might care about." "Emily." "And when it finally happened, when you kissed me, I thought, maybe—" She shook her head. "But you ran like you always do." "I was scared." "I know, and I understand. But I can't stay here waiting for you to get over your fears. I have my own life to live." Alexander stepped closer to her. "What if I told you I've gotten over them? That I'm ready now? Then I'd say you had your chance and you missed it." The words dropped between them like stones. Alexander looked at her as if he'd just been punched. "Is that final? It's practical." Emily stood. "Alexander, you're an amazing man, smart, successful. And when you let your guard down, even funny. But you're 35 and still learning how to deal with feelings. I'm 28, and I don't want to spend the next few years being your emotional education teacher." "That's harsh." "It's honest. There's a difference." Alexander stayed quiet for a moment, taking in the rejection. "When are you leaving?" "Next week." "So soon?" "Classes start in the fall semester. I need to settle in, find an apartment, things like that." "Emily Alexander." "Stop." She put a hand on his arm. Don't make this harder than it already is. Are you sure? I'm sure. This is the right decision for me. And what about us? Emily gave a sad smile. There is no us, Alexander. There's you afraid of commitment, and me tired of waiting. She grabbed her bag. Emily. She stopped, but didn't turn around. But good luck in Chicago. I hope you find what you're looking for. Thank you. I hope you do too. Emily left the lab for the last time, and Alexander stood in the middle of the empty room, listening to the echo of her footsteps fading down the hallway. A week later, outside the airport, Emily hugged Claire one last time. Are you sure you're doing the right thing? Her sister asked. No, but I'm doing the necessary thing. What's the difference? The right thing would be to stay and fight for what I want. The necessary thing is to leave and find out who I am when I'm not fighting against circumstances. Claire smiled. When did you get so wise? When I fell in love with a man who was more afraid of his own feelings than I was of mine. As the plane took off, Emily looked out the window at Boston, growing smaller and smaller. She didn't know that at that exact moment, Alexander was at home, sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and research that had nothing to do with Harrison Innovations. There were maps of Chicago, information about the university where Emily would be studying, and a notebook full of ideas he'd been working on for days. He wasn't trying to forget her. He was planning how to win her back. And for the first time since Emily had met him, Alexander was ready to do something completely irrational, impulsive, and out of control. He was ready to fight for love. 2 months later, Emily was on a flight back to Boston, looking out the window and trying to calm her nerves. Claire's graduation was the next day, and she had promised to be there, even if it meant returning to the city, where she had left behind much more than just a job. Chicago had been a life-changing experience. The classes were challenging, the professors demanding, and she was discovering parts of herself she'd never explored before. But on quiet nights in the dorm, when the noise of the big city finally faded, she found herself thinking about Alexander more often than she cared to admit. It's just a weekend, she muttered to herself as the plane landed. Graduation, party, then back to Chicago. Claire was waiting for her at the airport with a bright smile and a hug that lasted almost a full minute. I can't believe you're here, Claire said, grabbing one of the suitcases. How's Chicago? How are the classes? Did you meet anyone interesting? Slow down. Future lawyer. One question at a time. Sorry, I'm just so excited and nervous, and excited to be nervous. Emily laughed. What do you mean nervous? You passed your finals with excellent grades. It's not about the grades, it's because, well, you'll see. There was something in Claire's tone that made Emily curious. But before she could ask more, they were already in the car on the way to the hotel. The next day, Emily arrived at Claire's university campus wearing a navy blue dress she had bought especially for the occasion. The ceremony was outdoors on the main lawn, and hundreds of people were settling into perfectly arranged rows of chairs. Where are you going to sit? Claire asked, clearly nervous. In the family section, I guess. Why are you acting so strange? I'm not strange. I'm anticipating things. What things? You'll find out. Emily frowned. But before she could press further, Claire ran off to join the other graduates. The ceremony went on as usual for the first 40 minutes. The dean gave an inspiring speech about the future. A few professors spoke about academic excellence, and Emily was beginning to relax until she heard something that made her freeze in her seat. And now, the announcer said, we have a special presentation from a guest who traveled from Boston especially for this ceremony. Emily's stomach dropped when she saw a familiar figure walking up to the stage. Alexander, wearing a dark suit and holding a microphone, stopped at the center of the stage and looked directly at her in the audience. Good afternoon, he said, his voice echoing through the sound system. My name is Alexander, and I'm here today to do something I should have done 2 months ago. Emily felt her cheeks flush as she realized everyone around her was now staring. There's someone in this audience, Alexander continued, who changed my life in a way I never thought possible. Oh my God, Emily whispered, sinking into her seat. This person started working at my company as a secretary, and I, being the brilliant man that I am, spent weeks treating her like she was invisible. Soft laughter spread through the audience, until one day she solved a problem that 15 PhD scientists couldn't solve in 3 minutes. Emily covered her face with her hands, and then I thought, interesting, maybe I should pay attention to her. More laughter. The problem was, the more I paid attention, the more I realized she wasn't just smart. She was funny. She was brave. She was honest in a way that cut through all the walls I'd spent years building around myself. Emily looked around and noticed Claire sitting in the front row of graduates, smiling like she knew exactly what was happening. And then, Alexander went on, I did what any mature and emotionally balanced man would do in that situation. I panicked. The audience laughed louder now. When she told me she felt something for me, I pretended it was just work stress. When we kissed, I acted like it was a mistake. And when she decided to leave the company and go to Chicago, I pretended I didn't care. Alexander paused, searching for Emily's face in the crowd. Emily Thompson, are you out there? Reluctantly, Emily waved, feeling like the entire university was now staring only at her. Perfect, because I need to say a few things to you, and apparently I'm completely unable to do that in private, without panicking all over again. Alexander. No, Emily murmured, but her voice was lost in the hum of the curious audience. First, you were right about everything. I'm cold, calculating, and terrified of feeling anything real. Second, you're the most amazing person I've ever met, and I was a fool to let you go. Third, I've spent the last 2 months researching you, Chicago, your university, and how a tech company CEO could move to the Midwest without completely ruining his career. Emily's eyes widened. And fourth, Emily Thompson, you were just the secretary. But secretly, you stole my heart. The crowd let out a collective awe. Emily didn't know whether to laugh or cry. So, Alexander continued, stepping down from the stage and walking toward the section where she was sitting. I have a question for you, Alexander. No, Emily Thompson. He stopped right in front of her, still holding the microphone. Will you marry me? The silence that followed was deafening. Emily looked at Alexander, then at the hundreds of people waiting for her answer, then at Claire, who was clearly trying not to laugh. You're crazy, she finally said, completely. Alexander admitted, crazy about you. You can't just show up at my sister's graduation and propose to me. Apparently, I can because I just did. And what if I say no? Then I'll take the rejection and go back to Boston, knowing I at least tried to do the right thing. Emily studied him for a long moment. There was something different about him. The stiffness was gone, replaced by a vulnerability she had never seen before. Alexander, do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? I do, but you always told me to stop hiding behind professionalism. So, I decided to be completely, publicly, embarrassingly honest about how I feel. And how do you feel? That you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. And I was a coward for not having the courage to fight for you before. Emily looked around at all the people waiting for her response, then back at Alexander. This is without a doubt the most ridiculous marriage proposal in history. I know. And you really flew all the way here just for this. I did. And if you say yes, I'm ready to move to Chicago to be close to you while you finish school. You'd do that? I'd do anything for you, Emily. I should have realized that a long time ago. Emily stayed silent for a few more seconds, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on her. Finally, she stood up. Alexander, she said loud enough for everyone to hear. This is the craziest, most impulsive, most completely irrational thing anyone has ever done for me. Is that a yes? Emily smiled, feeling tears begin to form in her eyes. It's a yes, but with one condition. What is it? You take care of all the paperwork today, because after that performance, you're going to have a lot to explain. The crowd burst into applause and cheers. Alexander dropped the microphone, picked Emily up in his arms, and spun her around as she laughed and cried at the same time. When he set her down, she looked into his eyes and saw for the first time the man who had fallen in love with her without being afraid to admit it. You're really impossible, she whispered. I know, he whispered back, but now I'm your impossible. And then he kissed her right there in the middle of the graduation ceremony as hundreds of people clapped, and Claire screamed with joy from the front row. 6 months later, in the garden of the Boston Harbor Hotel, Emily was in the bridal suite, trying not to laugh, while Claire adjusted her veil for the 10th time. Stop moving, Claire complained. You're worse than a kid. I can't help it. Every time I think about marrying the man who once told me feelings were unnecessary complications, I have to laugh. He's changed. I know. That's why it's funny. Laura came into the room carrying a bouquet of white and blue flowers. How's our bride doing? Nervous? Claire answered for Emily. I'm not nervous, Emily protested. I'm just anticipating the moment when Alexander realizes he married someone who's going to completely reorganize his life. Poor guy. Laura laughed. Does he have any idea what he's getting into? Not the slightest. But it's too late to back out now. Outside in the garden decorated with golden lights and wild flowers, Alexander was adjusting his tie for the 20th time while Dr. Harrison tried to calm him down. "Boss, are you okay?" "I'm great. Why wouldn't I be? It's only the most important day of my life. Nothing to be nervous about." "You're sweating." "I'm not sweating. I'm lightly perspiring due to the weather conditions." Michael walked over laughing. "Alexander, you look like you're about to pass out." "I'm not going to pass out. I'm a successful executive. Successful executives don't faint at weddings, nor do they repeat the same sentence 3 times in a row," Dr. Harrison added. The music started, and the guests took their seats arranged in a semicircle around the makeshift altar. There were about 80 people, an interesting mix of folks from Harrison Innovations, Emily's friends, family from both sides, and a few longtime clients who had become close over the years. Alexander took his place next to the pastor, taking a deep breath. When the music changed to the bride's entrance, he looked toward the petal-covered path. First came the bridesmaids, Claire, glowing in her lilac dress, and Laura, smiling like it was her own wedding. Then came Emily. Alexander felt like the air had completely left his lungs. She looked stunning in a simple but elegant dress, her hair in soft waves and that smile that always disarmed him. When she reached him, she whispered, "Breathe, Alexander. Fainting at the altar is not on our schedule." "I'm not going to faint," he whispered back. "Of course not. You're a successful executive. You heard that?" "I heard everything. You're not exactly subtle when you're nervous." The pastor, a kind man named Father Harrison, who had baptized Claire years ago, smiled at the couple. "We are gathered here today to celebrate the union of Alexander and Emily, 2 people who prove that love can show up in the most unexpected places. Like a tech lab," Emily whispered, making Alexander smile. "Alexander," the pastor continued, "would you like to say your vows?" Alexander took a deep breath and pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. "I wrote a few things," he began, but Emily placed her hand on the paper. "No noches. Speak from the heart." "Emily, I practiced. Alexander, you can explain complex algorithms off the top of your head. You can tell me why you want to marry me without looking at notes." Alexander put the paper away and looked into her eyes. "Emily Thompson, when you came into my life, I thought you were just another employee. Then I thought you were an interesting puzzle to solve. It took me an embarrassingly long time to realize you were the person I had been waiting for without knowing it." "Better," she whispered. "You taught me that being vulnerable isn't weakness. You taught me that laughter is more important than always being right. And you taught me that some of life's best moments are the ones you can't plan, like getting stuck in an elevator. Like getting stuck in an elevator with you." Alexander smiled. "I promise to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of your love, your humor, and your endless patience with emotionally delayed men." The guests laughed, and Emily wiped away a tear that had slipped out. "My turn?" she asked. "Emily, when we first met, you were the most intimidating CEO I'd ever seen. Cold, distant, and apparently allergic to any sign of human emotion." "That doesn't sound like a wedding vow," he muttered. "Hold on, I'm getting to the good part." Emily smiled. "It took time, but I discovered that underneath all that coldness was a man capable of deep feelings, a man brave enough to change, to grow, and to propose in the most ridiculous way possible at a graduation ceremony. It was romantic. It was embarrassing. But it worked." "Emily," the pastor gently interrupted. "Your vows? Oh, right. Alexander, I promise to keep simplifying your life when you make it too complicated. I promise to laugh with you, especially at you, when necessary. And I promise to never let you forget that the best moments are the ones that happen when we stop trying to control everything." They exchanged simple gold rings, and when the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Alexander kissed Emily with such passion that the guests broke into enthusiastic applause. The party that followed was exactly as Emily had imagined, relaxed, joyful, and full of life. There was an eclectic buffet with both fancy food and a few homemade dishes Claire had insisted on preparing. The music shifted between soft jazz and lively salsa, thanks to Emily's cousin, who was a DJ. "I don't know how to dance salsa," Alexander said when Emily pulled him to the dance floor. "I'll teach you. Just follow my lead and try not to step on my feet. That's harder than it sounds. Most good things are." As the night went on, Emily realized she had made an important decision. During a break from dancing, she pulled Alexander aside to a quiet corner. "I need to tell you something." "What?" he asked, still slightly out of breath from the dancing. "I've decided to transfer my college to Boston." Alexander froze. "What?" I already talked to administration. I can finish my degree here at Northeastern. That way we can really live together, not just on the weekends. Emily, you don't have to do that for me. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for us. She smiled. Besides, I have an idea for after I graduate. What idea? How about we start our own company? Something focused on teaching young people programming, but in a way that's accessible without all that academic fluff that scares people off. Alexander looked at her as if she had just suggested they fly to the moon. An education company? Why not? You have the technical know-how, and I have a gift for making complicated things simple. We could really make a difference for people who think programming is only for geniuses. Emily, that's crazy. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. They kissed again, and Emily felt like everything had finally fallen into place. Later, as the party was winding down and the last guests were leaving, Claire walked up to Emily. How does it feel, Mrs. Alexander? Strange. Really strange. Emily laughed. But happy. He's a good man. He is. He just needed a little time to realize it. Claire looked over at Alexander, who was on the other side of the garden, saying goodbye to Dr. Harrison and the Harrison Innovations team. You changed him. You know. I didn't change anything. I just helped him find parts of himself that were already there. And him? Did he change you? Emily thought for a moment. He taught me that it's possible to be practical and romantic at the same time. That it's okay to plan for the future without losing the spontaneity of the present. When Alexander came over, Claire kissed her sister on the forehead and quietly stepped away. Ready to go? He asked, offering his arm. Ready? They walked together toward the car, decorated with cans and ribbons, all set for the honeymoon starting the next day. Emily. Yes. Thank you. For what? For being patient with me. For not giving up when I was being an idiot. For teaching me that loving someone might just be the most rational thing a person can do. Emily stopped and looked at him. Alexander, you're still learning. Love isn't rational. It's the most wonderfully irrational thing in the world. Then why does it work? Because sometimes the best things in life don't make sense on paper. He laughed, and Emily realized it was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. As they drove to the hotel where they would spend their first night as husband and wife, Emily looked out the window at the lights of Boston and smiled. In a few years, maybe they'd be teaching programming to teenagers in their own office. Maybe they'd expand to other cities. Maybe there would be kids running around a house with a backyard. Or maybe none of it would go exactly as planned, and it would still be perfect that way.